Hello, and welcome to The Fold. I'm Hitsuji, and if you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you're trying to learn Japanese. Now, I apologize in advance for my accent and my pronunciation. They aren't perfect, but I promise you that the knowledge is there. The goal of this video series is to help people learn the basics and fundamentals of Japanese grammar regardless of their skill levels. We'll be starting with the basics of Japanese grammar and then building upon what we learn as we go. Think of it like a skill tree in a video game. Each skill that we learn can be used to learn other skills in the tree, until eventually we have a complex tree of abilities that we can use. The topic of this video specifically is word order, and specifically how English word order and Japanese word order differ. This is a core aspect of syntax that I believe is absolutely crucial to learn about any language before you start learning any other grammar principles. Once we have a firm understanding of word order, everything else that we learn will make that much more sense. There aren't really prerequisites for learning word order. It's a very fundamental grammar principle that spans... My cat just jumped into the closet and made a very loud noise. Anyway, there aren't really any prerequisites for learning word order. It's a principle that applies to every language you can imagine. That being said, there are a few things that I recommend learning before we start. For one thing, if you're going to learn Japanese, I highly recommend learning the kana, hiragana, and katakana. While it's not strictly necessary to learn hiragana or katakana to speak and understand Japanese, it will help you immensely in the entire learning process. This is especially true if you do plan on writing or typing Japanese and reading manga, for example. Furthermore, learning the hiragana and the katakana will help you build up to kanji, and kanji is absolutely crucial in learning and solidifying your understanding of vocabulary. However, I personally think that it's better to learn hiragana, katakana, and kanji through a different medium than videos. The reason for that is the same reason that you don't necessarily look up a video to learn vocabulary for Japanese in general. Somebody can spew off a bunch of vocabulary, maybe some things that you might want to know for specific situations, but the reality is that you can just use one of the many free apps and Google Translate to look up the words that you want to know and then write them down. Similarly, learning the hiragana and katakana are pretty cut and dry. There's 92 characters, you can look them up, and then you can practice them. If you want more practice with pronunciation, that's a different story, but again, I'm not the one to teach you that. Instead, in the description of this video, I will be including articles, charts, and other guides related to hiragana, katakana, and kanji for your benefit. And if for whatever reason enough people want to learn more about hiragana, katakana, and kanji, I'll be glad to make videos for them. What I can recommend is that you start learning them as soon as possible. You can do this by pulling up the charts, making flashcards, and then studying them every day. In addition to the flashcards, I highly recommend writing down each hiragana and katakana a few times every day. This is especially important if you plan on writing a lot of Japanese, whether in a school setting or to a pen pal or whatever. This is because the language is particularly difficult to write when compared to something like Spanish, for example, that already uses the same characters as English. This is because for the most part, kanji all have several brushstrokes that you need to learn, and it can take a long time to write if you're not used to it. Or you can just be like me and mostly type the kanji out. But again, that's not going to be the situation for everybody. I did take Japanese classes in college, and I absolutely wish that I wrote more of them. I will be including the hiragana, katakana, kanji, and romaji for every word that's relevant in any of the examples that I give for this video, just to give you a better understanding of the grammar. Because again, I'm not trying to teach you how to read or write Japanese in this series. I'm just teaching you the grammar. And that gets significantly more daunting if you need to know the characters for it. Additionally, everything that you know about grammar in the English language will carry over to Japanese. I'll be constantly relating the grammar that we learn in Japanese to the English equivalent so that you can better understand what we're learning. So, the more that you know about English, the better that you'll be able to learn Japanese. That being said, I will be explaining everything that we learn as we go, including the English principles. So, you'll probably learn a lot about English and Japanese in this series. If you have any questions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comments. This series will be ongoing as long as I have a subject to teach about, so please let me know what you want to learn. My ultimate goal is to help you out, so if there's anything you think of that I can improve on, please let me know. Now, on to the actual grammar. So when I say word order, I'm referring to the order in which the subject, object, and verb appear in a sentence. English sentences use subject, verb, object order, while Japanese sentences use subject, object, verb order. These are abbreviated as SVO and SOV respectively. But what does that even mean? Let's break it down. The subject of the sentence, simply put, is the topic of the sentence. The way I think of the subject is the noun that is verbing in the sentence. The verb, then, it's a little more obvious. It's the action that's being performed by the subject. Finally, the object would be the thing that's affected by the verb in the sentence. In other words, the object can be the noun being verbed or what the verbing is happening relative to. This all sounds a little confusing, I'm sure, but it'll all make sense when we look at some examples. We often don't think about word order or other similar grammar principles when we're speaking our native language, but as we look at these examples, you'll see what I'm talking about. Example 1.
I went to the convenience store.
私はコンビニに行きました。
As we see in this example, both sentences start with the subject. I in English and watashi in Japanese. However, the verb is the second word in the English sentence, went, and it's the last word in the Japanese sentence, ikimashita. And as we would expect, the convenience store is the last phrase in the English sentence, but konbini is right in the middle of the Japanese sentence. You'll notice that I've highlighted the words to and the in English, and I've also highlighted the particle ni in Japanese. Those words themselves are not the object of the sentence, but the way I think of it, they basically modify the object in the same way that adverbs modify verbs and adjectives modify nouns. With objects in a sentence, you'll notice that in many cases, these articles, particles, etc. are necessary to tell us how exactly the verb was done relative to the object. You'll also notice that I highlighted the wa next to watashi in Japanese. This is because the wa particle actually denotes what the subject of the sentence is, typically. This makes it very easy to identify subjects in Japanese, so that's great for us. Now, let's look at another example. Example 2.
Kimiko gave the book to me. Kimiko gave me the book.
きみこさんは本を私にくれました。きみこさんは私に本をくれました。
Now here we see basically the same thing being said two different ways in both languages. There are probably slight nuances to the meaning that I could explain, but we're not going to worry about that right now. What's important to note in these examples is that no matter what order we put the objects in, the subject and the verb are always in the same relative position depending on the language. In normal conversational English, the word order will always be subject, verb, object, and in Japanese, it will always be subject, object, verb. Now you'll also notice in this example that there are two objects highlighted in different colors. This is to differentiate the direct object and the indirect object. Remember when I said we were going to be learning a little bit about English? This is that part. The direct object is very easy. Whatever object is being verbed, that's the direct one. The indirect object will usually feature a prepositional phrase including words such as in, to, from, for, and so on. And this means that the direct object usually won't feature a prepositional phrase. In the example we just discussed, the book would be the direct object and I would be the indirect object. This is because the book is being given by Kimiko and I am the recipient. Kimiko isn't giving me and the book isn't receiving anything. In Japanese, the particle wo, which is usually just pronounced o in normal speech, is always attached to the direct object. This is true 100% of the time. If you see a wo next to an object, it's the direct object. And that character will basically never be found anywhere else. So if you're ever reading a sentence and you see wo, that's a direct object. Notably, in both languages, not every single sentence is going to require an object. Word order just tells us where the object will go if there is one. I might look a little off-center right now because my phone died while I was recording this, so apologies for that. English speakers out there may have heard the principle that a proper sentence will always have both a noun and a verb in it, and this is technically true. The English sentence I went and its Japanese equivalent watashi wa ikimashita both have a subject and a verb but no object. Both of those sentences are technically correct. However, an object would add more details and circumstances to them that would make them make more sense. And you'll want to be using objects in most of the sentences that you use. Plus, most grammar principles are going to require some kind of object within them. Consequently, knowing the subject-object-verb order of Japanese will help you place those grammar principles properly into a sentence. This will make the sentences that you say sound much more natural. Example 3.
Tomonori threw the ball.
友則くんはボールを投げた。
For this last example, I'm not going to highlight anything. I want you to tell me in the comments where you think the subject, object, and verb in each sentence goes. Let me know what you think and how you came to that conclusion. On a final note, there's a special thing that I want to discuss about the subject in Japanese. In English, every single clause that we say will always have a subject in it, period. Sentences like I went don't make any sense if we just say went. Who went? We don't know. We have to say things like I went to the park, or Billy gave me his ice cream, or Yuri kicked the ball. Every single sentence has the subject. We can't just say ran to the park, or gave me his ice cream, or kicked the ball. However, in Japanese, the subject of the sentence gets dropped rather often. As a matter of fact, when you're having a natural conversation with somebody, you'll almost always be excluding the subject of the sentence as long as both of the speakers know what the subject is. Here's an example of this in action. Example 4.
羊飼い先生はお元気ですか？はい、元気です。
In English, this translates more or less to the student asking, "Are you doing well, Hitsujikai sensei?" And Hitsujikai sensei responds, "Yes, I am well." But you'll see in Japanese that the word watashi is not used in Hitsujikai sensei's response. This is because the student and Hitsujikai sensei both understand Hitsujikai sensei to be the subject of the sentence in question. It takes some getting used to, but eventually a lot of the sentences that you use will be just object-verb or even just verbs. Just remember, there actually is a subject in each of these sentences, it's just implicit. In other words, both the speakers know who the subject is, and so it becomes redundant to say it over and over again. We can talk more about why that happens later, but essentially, in English we use more pronouns to shorten our sentences, while Japanese just tends to drop the subject entirely. And that covers the basics of word order in Japanese. Again, if you have any questions at all, please let me know in the comments. The odds are that somebody else also has that question, and I know that I'm not a perfect teacher by any means. Any feedback, good or bad, is always appreciated because I want to improve how I teach to you. Thanks for watching. Mata ne!